a stricter view than the law.
Hello everyone! Hello, welcome to the show. Today's going to be a bit of a long one, so you might want to get yourself a cup of coffee. I'm trying to make it as short as possible. But today, you see, it's long because we're talking about what happened on March the 10th, 2017. And that was when the Royal Australian Commission reconvened to have another go again versus JW.org. You see, there was a commission that was set up, and they met in 2015 to discuss the allegations of sexual abuse and how institutions handled this. And in the summer of 2015, JW.org was on the stand trying to defend themselves. And now, on March the 10th, they had to reconvene to discuss how they were handling the recommendations and the findings of the Royal Australian Commission. So in July and August of 2015, it was JW.org's turn, and it was discovered that they had records of 1,006 cases of documented abusers within the organization, and yet not once did they alert the authorities. In fact, the chair of the commission said that he doesn't know of any other religious institution that has the flaws that they found in JW.org. There's lots of information out there about what happened at this hearing. I actually recorded it and I put it up on my YouTube channel. I know that many other people also have done this, and so this is great. We're giving it wide publicity. We want as many people as possible to see this. Many people actually left after the 2015 hearings, and I imagine that many more will leave after this one as well when they see what really goes on in the organization. But before we get into all the details, I'm just going to show you a quick preview of what happened, and you're going to see some of the frustrations that occurred.
Despite this evidence, the Royal Commission will hear that the Jehovah's Witnesses have failed to address many of the recommendations arising from Case Study 29. And in fact, the Royal Commission recommended, as you'll be aware, that the organisation should always report allegations of child sexual abuse to authorities where the complainant is still a minor at the time that the abuse comes to the attention of the organisation, or where there are others who may still be at risk at the hands of the alleged abuser. Now, you haven't adopted that recommendation. Can you explain why? It might leave someone with the impression that there's really a dual practice here, that congregants are being kept from information which, with regard to processes that govern their lives or govern issues that arise in their lives. Do you see that? You see, Mr. Spinks, we're back to where we were in Case Study 29. Of really struggling with just what the position is, because there's so many different conflicting documents, and we're given documents which have been superseded as authority for what's said to be current policy. Firstly, are you aware that the law in Queensland in relation to age of consent changed last year?
I'm not. If this is inaccurate, then that needs to be addressed, but I wasn't aware of that.
Well, Mr. Spinks, the best evidence of what the policies are of the organisation is to look at the policy documents. And if it's not there, then it's not the policy. Wouldn't that be right?
With regard to documentation, that's correct.
Why is it that the Jehovah's Witness organisation has not adopted a standard policy to report allegations of child sexual abuse to the authorities where there is still or an ongoing risk of harm to any child? Well, in brief, what you're saying is you haven't changed, in response to the Royal Commission report in Case Study 29, you haven't changed anything in relation to shunning, is that right?
I found it frustrating watching the JW elders bumbling through their notes, rambling, and constantly apologizing. Not to victims, of course, because they've yet to do that. Have a look.
Not our intention to be defensive, but again, Your Honour, with respect, and I certainly don't want to be protesting a point.
Say what you believe to be true.
I apologise, Mr. Stewart. I apologise if I'm repeating something that you've clearly stated here. But could I respectfully, Your Honour, say I apologise for being direct with it, Mr. Stewart, but again, and I apologise, Your Honour has said we're repeating the point, but I'd say again, and we're going to appear very repetitive, I apologise, Your Honour, but
The hearing began with senior lawyer Angus Stewart giving an opening address. He was there in 2015 and did an awesome job. So we're very happy to see him return. If you want to download his opening address, you can from their website. One thing he mentioned that I thought was very interesting was that they had actually invited a governing body member to be present. They didn't even actually have to fly all the way to Australia. They could have done it through video, like through Skype or something, but they refused. They couldn't find the time. I just found that really weird. But I guess, how do you defend your dismal record of defending pedophiles and covering up the abuses and kicking out victims and shunning them? You can't really. But it is surprising because Jeffrey Jackson did say how happy he was there to testify. I don't know if you recall in the first one. So it's a bit weird. I thought he'd be happy to testify again. But not testifying is not at all in line with the scriptures. This is from a 1997 January 15th Watchtower. Notice where I've highlighted there. It says, "Our ministry may at times bring us before public officials. Asserting their authority, they may demand of us an explanation as to why we do certain things. You know, like covering up pedophiles." And then the scripture there that I've posted at the bottom that I've highlighted at 1 Peter 3 verse 15 says, "But sanctify the Christ as Lord in your hearts, always ready to make a defense before everyone who demands of you a reason for the hope you have or for why you hide pedophiles, but doing so with a mild temper and deep respect." And then we've got the scripture there at Matthew chapter 10 verse 18, which I've pasted on top of the transcript from the opening address. It says, "And you'll be brought before governors and kings," or royal commissions, "for my sake, for a witness to them and the nations." Yes, it should be a witness, but this is actually a very bad witness because the organization has not conducted themselves very Christian-like. It was sheer luck, or maybe Jehovah had a hand in making sure that there was a governing body member in Australia at the time of the 2015 hearings. But you can bet your boots that the organization would make sure that that didn't happen again. There'd be no governing body members anywhere near Australia during the time of these hearings. They were probably hiding off in a bunker somewhere. But, once again, they prove that they are nothing like Jesus and nothing like the apostles in Bible times defending their faith. They run like a bunch of cowards when they're asked to be present. And they seem to be doing this on a regular basis, too. And, it's really too bad that the governing body members, none of them were there or through video hookup. But on the other hand, if you remember the first commission there in 2015, Jeffrey Jackson didn't even bother to read the testimony from the victims. He had read the testimony from the lawyers, I remember him saying. And yet, I remember there was one of the victims that were there. And one thing she said was when she was being abused over the many years and, she'd gone to the elders, she hadn't gotten any help. Finally, she wrote to the organization pleading for help. And of course, it never found its way to the governing body. But now, here's a perfect opportunity for the governing body members to actually hear what goes on in the organization and to read the letter and to read the testimony from actual victims that they have wronged. And they didn't even bother to read it. It just shows the callousness from the organization. It just, it's unbelievable. Anyways, the other thing that we learned that I found interesting was that Terence O'Brien, who was at one time, at least in 2015, he had been the committee branch overseer for Australia, but not anymore. He's since been banished to Papua New Guinea. We can only speculate as to why. Was it because he was caught lying on the stand at the last Royal Commission about Jeffrey Jackson, trying to pass him off as just a translator and not a governing body member, and then failed to keep him off the stand? Or was it because the branch organization book was leaked to the Australian Commission and used against them as evidence? We can only guess, but my gut feeling is that the organization knew he'd be recalled to testify and wanted him to know as little as possible, so they sent him as far off the earth as possible. Hence, he was banished to remote Papua New Guinea. Here's another interesting point. Take a look at the transcript from the hearing. O'Brien was asked what process they went through to address the issues that had been raised from case study 29. Did he say they prayed for God's Spirit or consulted with the governing body? as they claim to be led by God's Spirit. Nope. It was legal department this and lawyer that. Just take a look. Imagine if this was in a Watchtower study and the question at the bottom of the paragraph read, "How did the organization arrive at the overlapping generations theory?" And the answer in the paragraph said, "Oh, it was all from the legal department." When they need direction, they don't turn to Jehovah, but rather to their lawyers. They need to change their Return to Jehovah brochure to this. After the 2015 hearings, the Royal Commission put together their findings, and this slide is from that report. This is up on their website if you wish to download it. Then JW.org responded to the findings, and the Commission then followed up. These slides are from the lawyer's opening address. You can pause the video here if you wish to review them, but I've pasted them all into a summary table with their current status from this hearing near the end of this video. So these are the topics that were discussed and what I will be reviewing today. One of the recommendations from the Royal Commission was that the organization needed to put all their policies in one place and make them available to all the members. They needed to know what their rights are. The good news is that the following new documents and new policies were created. There was an August 1st, 2016 letter that went out to all elders worldwide. Then there is a child protection guidelines for branch office service desks. And then there's the child safeguarding policy of Australia. The last one has yet to be sent to all members yet, but supposedly it's going to be done within the next few weeks. Notice from the transcript what little priority they put on this document. According to Terence O'Brien, they didn't even start working on it until after he was banished to Papua New Guinea, and that was in October of 2016. So they waited more than a year at least before they even started it. Protecting children is clearly not a priority for JW.org. Why did it take so long to get this policy out to all members, and it's still not out, especially when they had the UK one to model it after, and it's been out since 2013. The two policy documents, as well as the Elders Letter, are all available as exhibits for Case Study 54 on the Royal Commission's website. And check out the Elders Letter, which I have up on the screen. Notice I've highlighted the many times where they mention how elders need to call the legal department, the service department, or both, as soon as pretty much anything sexual happens. Their first priority is not to help the person, but to protect themselves legally. Protect all their billions of dollars, protect their reputation, but not protect you. If you'd called the proper authorities, they would know what to do and how best to protect you and deal with the abuser. Here's a depiction of what JW.org would have done in Jesus' day. Let's have a look now and see what was said regarding the reporting of abuse.
The Royal Commission found that it's a general practice of the Jehovah's Witness organisation in Australia not to report allegations of child sexual abuse to the police or other authorities unless required by law to do so. You're aware of that finding, of course.
I'm aware of the finding, but we have never had a practice of not reporting.
Well, Mr. O'Brien, we went through this on the previous occasion, so I don't want to spend time on it, but of the 1,006 cases, if I recall correctly, not one was reported by the Jehovah's Witnesses organisation.
Well, I think the point was brought out that hundreds were reported, not by the organisation, because the organisation doesn't report. That's left to the elders handling the case. They're the ones who take the matter to the authorities or encourage the parents.
The simple point is this, is it's your policy is to not report unless the law requires it. That's the policy, simply put, isn't it?
No, that's not policy. If I could correct you again,
Yes.
you excuse me for doing that. Our policy is if it's mandatory reporting, we report. If the child or other children are at risk because of a perpetrator, we will report. And thirdly, we will always inform the parents, or if it's an adult survivor, that they have the absolute right to report. So to suggest we have a policy of not reporting is quite inaccurate.
Well, you've qualified it in one respect then. You said you have a policy to not report unless you assess that a child is at risk of harm.
So we, referring to the elders in the congregation, not the organisation, and keeping in mind that even if there is no risk and it's not mandatory reporting, we still inform the parent or the survivor, if it's an adult, they have the absolute right to report, and we will support them if they do that.
Yes, but that's then a case of them reporting, not the elders or the organisation reporting, not so.
No, because the law allows it.
It's so frustrating dealing with them. They will say whatever they think you want to hear, and then continue on with their life-destroying policies and their blatant lies. They may say that it wasn't their policy to not report, but it was not in their policy to report, and it most definitely is not in their practices to report either. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if it was their practice to report, then we wouldn't be here today, would we? Let's take a look at some interesting statistics that have happened since the last Royal Commission of 2015. This is from the opening address to this hearing. I'm just going to be reading what I've highlighted here. It says, in Case Study 29, Watchtower Australia produced 5,000 documents comprising, among other things, case files relating to 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse dating back to 1950. Officers at the Royal Commission reviewed these case files, and as a result, the Royal Commission referred information in relation to 514 alleged perpetrators to police. And then from the next point there, it says, of the remaining 492 alleged perpetrators identified in the case files, officers at the Royal Commission determined that there was either insufficient evidence in the case files to warrant referring matters to the police, or that the matters had already come to the attention of police. And then what I've highlighted here says that the Royal Commission will hear evidence that of the 17 allegations of child sexual abuse that the Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia have received since Case Study 29, they have reported 15 allegations to the authorities. In both cases that were not reported, the adult survivors of historical abuse elected not to report, and the Jehovah's Witnesses organization was happy. I'm really glad to see that they now seem to be reporting, even though it took pressure from Satan's system to get them to do it. I'm just a bit nervous though, and I wonder if they're actually going to keep doing this, or if they're going to revert back to their old ways. And I know that the chair feels the same way about this.
It's one thing to have responded since we looked at you. Another thing as to what you'll be doing in 5 years' time. You understand?
Yeah, 5 years future, Your Honour.
Unless intent is reflected clearly in your policy documents, there's a very good chance you'll just fall backwards. You understand?
The next bit is very frustrating, but I think it's important that you see what happened and can see for yourself what went on.
And in fact, the Royal Commission recommended, as you'll be aware, that the organisation should always report allegations of child sexual abuse to authorities where the complainant is still a minor at the time that the abuse comes to the attention of the organisation, or where there are others who may still be at risk at the hands of the alleged abuser. Now, you haven't adopted that recommendation. Can you explain why?
We have, with respect to Mr Stewart, again, if it's documentation, that may be the case, but you're aware that each of the incidents that have been reported to us, whatever the seriousness of it, since the public hearing, have been reported to the police for the very reason that you raise.
Well, Mr Spinks, the best evidence of what the policies are of the organisation is to look at the policy documents. And if it's not there, then it's not the policy. Wouldn't that be right?
With regard to documentation, that's correct.
And Mr Spinks, while the documents now make it clear that survivors or their parents should be told that they have, as it's put, an absolute right to report, it's not the policy to actually encourage them to report, is it? You see that it doesn't ask whether there's another child in danger.
I think, again, these are notes. I'm not in the legal department. These are the notes of the legal department, but I think the safeguarding policy uses the generic child, but I agree again that should say if a child is, or any child is still in danger. That's a good point.
And related to that is even if the victim at the time that the call is taken is an adult, it doesn't deal with the question of what to do if other children are still at home. So in other words, a 20-something, 30-something-year-old reports abuse by someone who's still in the congregation. The particular person's abuse occurred many, many years before, but that there are other children potentially at harm because of that abuser still being there. This doesn't deal with that.
You'd have to excuse my ignorance. I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Stewart, but does the Act that supports this advice make that point? I'm not certain. This is only the legal advice is the point I'm making.
You're effectively making the point, which is this, is why do you legalise it all the time and rely always on what the law provides? Why do you as an organisation just not adopt the policy, as many other organisations do, of reporting as a matter of course if there are still children who might be in harm's way?
Again, with respect, Mr. Stewart, that's a very isolated point. This is the specific legal advice that is given. When the call comes through to the service department, in every situation, that is the advice that's given. This is purely the legal requirement. So why do we legalise the matter? Because they're getting legal advice. When it comes through to the service department, then we assess this.
Mr. Spence, the trouble is you've taken us straight back to where we were. We were talking about the service department guidelines a minute ago, which doesn't have the kind of policy recorded that I'm speaking of, which is uniform reporting where there's any risk of harm. And you referred us to the legal obligations. Now we're on the legal obligations, you're referring us back to the service.
I think that's I respect that's how you're viewing it. If you want, could I clarify it again? Is that...
Well, let me put the question again.
Sure.
Why is it that the Jehovah's Witness organisation has not adopted a standard policy to report allegations of child sexual abuse to the authorities where there is still or an ongoing risk of harm to any child?
We do, Mr. Stewart. If it needs to be better documented, this is simply an extract of the applicable legal advice. This has nothing to do with our spiritual process, our scriptural process in the service department.
Mr. Spinks, when you say we do, what you mean to say is we do as a matter of practice report where a child might still be at risk. Is that what you mean to say?
Correct.
Yes, and I'm addressing this at the level of policy.
You could see the frustration in the lawyer. The bottom line, though, is that they need to report all abuse to the authorities, and they need to document it in their policies. Make their policies clear so that everybody understands what they need to do, and make it available to all. It's very simple. They make it so convoluted and so complicated, filled with legal mumbo-jumbo this and things that nobody understands. The bottom line is, when you're in trouble, who do you call? Your lawyer? No, you call the police. End of story. Okay, got that off my chest. They also discussed how the community is left unprotected when the JW organization fails to call the authorities. You see, when there's no second witness and the perpetrator, of course, doesn't admit that they've done anything, they leave it in Jehovah's hands. And when that happens, nothing is done about it and the community is left unprotected. They don't seem to feel they have any responsibility at all to the community. And this is what really bothers me. They put this dark cloud over your head all the time that, you're blood guilty for not, carting around their literature like a pack mule to warn everybody about the doom and gloom that's supposed to happen. And yet they have no problem at all having knowledge of information where a pedophile who has probably they say about a 97% chance of reoffending, they've allowed him to exist within the community. The authorities don't know, so they can't warn anybody. They can't do anything about it. They've got no problem with this whatsoever. They've got no responsibility, they feel. Horrible. Take a look.
But if they're not disfellowshipped, then they're not shunned, right?
No.
Right, and then goes on, this practice is an effective mechanism for protecting children in the congregation. Well, of course, I think we canvassed before that doesn't do anything for children outside the congregation. Would that be right?
Well, that's a position that's been taken, but again, we say that the congregation arrangement is one to protect the congregation from sin. We judge the matter of sin. We're not in competition with the legal justice system, and I think we've been down the road a little earlier that with reporting, we'll report that if it was mandatory reporting, that's a completely separate issue. If it's not, then we will leave that to the parent or the victim.
And this is why they're here. And now get ready, because they will be discussing the two-witness rule.
Right, going on now to address the two-witness rule. Mr. O'Brien, you're aware, of course, the Royal Commission found that the application of the two-witness rule in cases involving child sexual abuse is wrong. You're aware of that finding?
Yes, I'm aware of the finding.
And the recommendation that the Jehovah's Witness organisation should revise and modify its application of the two-witness rule, at least in cases involving complaints of child sexual abuse. You're aware of that recommendation?
Yes, I'm aware.
And I take it that that finding and that recommendation were the subject of the discussions you referred to earlier in the organisation with regard to its response to the Royal Commission.
Yes, so we considered the implications of that finding.
And your response is to say that the two-witness rule is required by the scriptures and can't be changed or avoided. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's our stand.
You're aware, I take it, that the criminal courts do not require corroboration of child sexual abuse or indeed the most heinous of sins.
Yes, I'm not clear on that particular point.
I'll ask you to accept
but I'll
that.
take your word for it. I'm
Section
sure it'll be right.
164 of the Evidence Act abolished the corroboration rule. So it's just misleading to say that this scriptural rule of two-witness rule is in harmony with the law of evidence. It's not in any way, is it?
I would defer to your knowledge of the law on that.
I just find that the organizations refusing to budge on their two-witness rule just highlights their hard-heartedness. I mean, first of all, child molestations are not done in front of a second witness. Okay, that's obvious. They are done in private. The scriptures where two witnesses are spoken about is not talking about child rapes or anything sexual at all. And thirdly, there is a scripture that does talk about rape, and it's found in the book of Deuteronomy. And let's see if there's any mention of two witnesses there. At Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 25 and 26, it says, "If, however, the man happened to meet the engaged girl in the field, and the man overpowered her and lay down with her, the man who lay down with her is to die by himself, and you must do nothing to the girl. The girl has not committed a sin deserving of death. This case is the same as when a man attacks his fellow man and murders him." The organization could easily use these scriptures to abolish their two-witness rule, but they would rather hard-heartedly keep it, knowing full well that it puts the lives and welfare of children at risk. Jeffrey Jackson at the 2015 August Commission had testified that he agreed that perhaps the trauma experienced from victims, could be used as circumstantial evidence and perhaps even as like a second witness. Let's see what was said.
Yes, well, it's just important as to whether the second witness has to be a witness to the abuse itself, or to what extent it can be, he or she can be a witness to circumstantial or corroborating evidence. So let me use an example. What about the trauma, evident trauma of the survivor? Would that be able to be taken into account as corroborating evidence?
Yes, it would need to be taken into account. And if I could mention, Mr. Stewart, these are the things that we're interested in following up on after the Royal Commission. just to make sure that everything is in place, because certainly these are the things we're interested in.
Yeah, let's use the trauma. Traumatization may not have happened. Okay, so perhaps he didn't say what he said in the second clip, but he definitely said what he said in the first clip. He said he was willing to consider it as evidence, but I guess our governing body member was just saying this. He was just using lip service to say whatever he thought they wanted him to say, but his heart was far removed from actually changing this very damaging policy that helps pedophiles and puts children at risk.
Now, subsequent to case study 29, the rule has not been modified so as to allow circumstantial or corroborating evidence such as evident trauma suffered by a victim. Was that nevertheless considered?
I'm sure Mr. Jackson would have taken that back to for consideration in the United States, but I'm not aware of discussions on the particular point.
So we too deduce, I take it, that he was wrong in saying that there may be a role for such evidence, that it turned out there isn't a role for such evidence. Was that right?
I couldn't answer that on behalf of Mr. Jackson, sorry.
No, he'd better not answer on behalf of Jeffrey Jackson. He's already had this poor fellow banished to Papua New Guinea. I can't think of a more remote place that they could send him to. Well, maybe perhaps the moon, but I'm assuming he's learned his lesson from that. You know, the organization is so adamant that they're following the scriptures. Yet they accept it when only one witness is found in the case of a molestation. They will take the one witness from that molestation, and then if that same pedophile goes and rapes another kid, then they take that child's witness testimony and say, okay, now we've got our two witnesses. Where is this in the Bible? The next point was about the alleged victim no longer having to confront their abuser. And I think this is fantastic that they've made a change regarding this. But they haven't communicated this in all their new policies, and this certainly needs to be done. So they're going to be making changes with that as well. And the policy remains silent when it comes to supporting younger survivors. So they need to address that. You know, their new policy about protecting children, the safeguarding child policy, has not been communicated to their members yet. And I wish I could be a fly on the wall to see them actually present it to their witness members, because I'd love to see how they're going to spin it. I can just imagine them saying something like, we love children so much, you know, we want to protect them, but apostates hate children or whatever, and call it all apostate-driven lies. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I can just imagine them spinning it like it's something good that they're presenting. What they're neglecting to say, of course, is that they're being forced to do this by Satan's world. Crazy, eh? There was a long discussion about those victims who felt that they had no other choice but to disassociate and were then shunned in the process. But what's really irritating about the organization is that they refuse to admit the truth about these ones. They insist, lyingly, that all those who disassociate do so by choice, and they do so because they, cannot uphold Jehovah's righteous standards, or they refuse to uphold Jehovah's standards or something. But the fact of the matter is that more and more often this is not the case. People who are disassociated didn't actually disassociate themselves at all. What happened was they did their research, they watched commissions like this one, saw how the organization has lied to them repeatedly, saw how they've been hiding pedophiles, and they understandably want nothing to do with this disgraceful organization. But they don't actually disassociate themselves because they know what the implications are. That means that all their friends and family will begin to shun them. So they just quietly try and fade. But the organization isn't content with that. You see, it's like they're a bunch of paranoid psychopaths. Are they talking about us? What are they saying about us? Are they saying anything bad about us? You see, the second you open your mouth and say how you really feel to your friends and family, like, did you watch the Royal Commission? Like, oh my God, what the heck? You know, as soon as you say something like that to your family, or even if you just like a Facebook post that says that is critical of the organization, you can find yourself summoned to appear before a judicial committee. And if you don't appear, if you say, well, I don't want to appear, sorry, not available, you know, not interested, they will disassociate you in absentia because they cannot have you saying anything bad about them. So they disassociate you. So for them to present this picture that you're disassociating yourself from them is a complete lie. They could at least say that most of the cases where people disassociate didn't actually disassociate themselves at all. But of course, they have to present the picture that they present and lie once again.
In brief, what you're saying is you haven't changed, in response to the Royal Commission report in case study 29, you haven't changed anything in relation to shunning, is that right?
Well, the branch committee or the directors of the Watchtower Bulb and Track Society of Australia are not authorised to be able to do that, Mr Stewart. That was a matter Mr Jackson would have taken back to the governing body as he said he would.
Yes, that's the point that you make, is you regard yourself bound by those policies, or to those policies by the scriptures, and you can't change them and therefore haven't changed them, is that right?
Scriptural understanding, most definitely.
None of that answers the point being that it's particularly damaging when a child sexual abuse victim leaves the organisation, disassociates from the organisation and is then shunned.
Well, that would be true if they disassociate themselves, you're referring to.
Yes.
Because that is the policy. But again, I think, as I pointed out in my evidence, I think Mr Jackson did as well, that here we're talking about somebody who is of an age where they have qualified for baptism. So they are somebody who's either approaching adulthood or an adult.
I sincerely hope that you young ones who are not yet baptized will not hold back from getting baptized as soon as you qualify. The sooner you can get baptized, the sooner you will receive greater protection and blessings from Jehovah. Not long ago, it made me very happy to observe a little 10-year-old brother get baptized.
Making that decision.
Bunch of crap.
Understanding the implications of choosing either to disassociate themselves, knowing the consequences will be shunning, or simply ceasing activity with the congregation, but not taking the stand of disassociation. So it's a choice.
A little 10-year-old brother get baptized.
What an absolute lie. Since when is a 10-year-old an adult or approaching adulthood? He knows darn well that the organization is heavily pushing children to get baptized, as we just saw with governing body member Stephen Lett. We've also seen governing body member Tony Morris say that if a child could get his driver's license, then he's old enough to get baptized, and implied that parents should withhold it until he gets baptized. Here O'Brien is saying that yes, it would be cruel to shun someone, yet these ones are adults and know what they are doing, understand the implications and have a choice. What a lie! It's certainly not the same for a child. If the organization is truly okay with their disassociation and disfellowshipping policies, then why would you have to lie about it? He keeps calling it a choice, but it's hardly a choice. Children do what they are told. It's not a coincidence that children happen to have the same religion as that of their parents. And in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, children are coerced into baptism. The sad thing is that they really don't know anything about the organization. They're just told what their parents tell them and what the organization tells them. And you can see what Stephen Lett just said there, that, the sooner you get baptized, the sooner you'll have Jehovah's protection. The end is around the corner, so you better get baptized. I know from my own experience, I was 14. And I had no history and no idea of the history of the organization and all the lies that they had told. I certainly wasn't told that. How can you hold a child accountable for the rest of their lives for something that they have no knowledge of? It's truly a blind faith, and it's not right. In the next clips, you're going to see where the chair tries to appeal to the elders and tries to appeal to their hearts and reason with them.
But if they are so unable to cope with what's happened and the way they've been treated inside the organisation, that they dissociate, then they lose all of their previous social structure. Is that right?
That could be the case, and we respect their right to make that decision.
Well, it's a pretty cruel way of dealing with someone, isn't it, who has suffered sexual abuse.
I could only repeat what I've said, Your Honour.
No, but it's cruel, isn't it? To take away, by reason of the rules that you impose, all of their social structure. That's cruel.
It is, I agree. It puts them in a difficult situation, but it is a choice.
You see, someone who comes to you and says, I was sexually abused, but because there's no two witnesses, you don't accept it. You don't make that finding. They're left in a very difficult position, aren't they?
If they choose not to report it to the authorities, then...
For whatever reason, if the organisation doesn't acknowledge that they were abused, that imposes a great burden on them, doesn't it?
If I could again respectfully say, Your Honour, we don't disbelieve a person who makes an accusation. That's why we investigate every accusation brought forth by the elders.
Yes, but if there's not two witnesses, you don't accept it, do you?
Because scripturally we're not able to.
I know. And that, you would understand, can be very, very distressing for someone who has come to you with that complaint, can't it?
Certainly. Not being a victim is very distressing. Whatever consequences come, yeah, we agree.
And that can lead to a chain of circumstances where that person feels unable to do other than dissociate from your organisation. Correct? Why is it necessary when someone feels that they can no longer abide the organisation and has to dissociate? Why is it necessary to shun them? Why can't they keep having social contact with those people who happen to remain in the organisation?
But I'd say again, and we're going to appear very repetitive, I apologise, Your Honour, but the individual can choose.
Why is it necessary for the organisation to tell all of its adherents, you must shun that person?
Because the individual has not taken the decision to no longer associate or to no longer be involved with congregation activities, which is their right. They've taken the decision to say, I'm shunning the congregation, I'm no longer a part of the congregation, I put it in writing. So the individual takes that action, and we understand the implications. When someone is disfellowshipped, the congregation takes that action. So the individual does not need to put themselves in a position where they're shunned. They can walk away, they can go to another congregation, takes that action. So the individual does not need to put themselves in a position making, Your Honour.
Well, you haven't answered the point, but we'll move on.
Answer the question, Mr. Smith. You have not answered his Honour's question. His Honour's question is, why is it necessary to shun the person who disassociates? And before you answer, let me clarify one thing. The person who disassociates, both you and Mr. O'Brien have now said it, you said that they shun the organisation. They don't necessarily at all. You're talking about someone who just doesn't want to be part of it anymore. They still want to have their friends, their family, and everything else, their social network. So accept that kind of person, but it disassociates. Now, why is it necessary to have a policy that everyone else must now shun them?
Again, that's a decision the person makes, because that individual...
Sphinx, that doesn't answer the
Mr.
question.
Stewart, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I think we should...
Well, the real answer to the question is because you say the Bible says so. That's the answer, isn't it?
Yes, that's our understanding of the scriptural disfellowshipping and disassociation doctrine.
I should just say also that in relation to the point that Mr. O'Brien, you made, and Mr. Spinks as well, I think, and that's that a person can become inactive without disassociating and in that way not be shunned. Now, without going through that evidence again, I just want to say to you that that's highly contested by a lot of people as to whether that is possible. I know you say that's the case. A lot of other people say it isn't.
Must you believe every single thing your friends believe? I mean, my best friend here is Jewish. I'm not Jewish. Yet I completely respect her beliefs. And the fact that we have different beliefs has no bearing on our friendship at all. You know, it's like if you decided to join a gym and you made friends there, but then you decided, I don't like the way this gym is run. I'd prefer to go to a different gym. Would that gym tell all the friends that you had there not to talk to you anymore because you joined a different gym? No, of course they wouldn't. But a very small-minded, all-controlling, all-encompassing cult would. And that's the problem. There are some people, some witnesses who were able to fade, and that's fantastic. But the problem that many of them face is that they live in a kind of a police state. Because the second they say anything negative about the organization, put up a Christmas decoration, or break any of the organization's plethora of rules, they will find themselves, as I've mentioned before, hauled up before a judicial committee. So it's really no way to live your life. And the only other way to get out is to move, which I did. You know, I'll just end this very distasteful subject by showing some quotes from JW org literature.
We agree to
Going on to
disagree.
the question of redress, you don't actually have a policy with regard to how to handle claims that are brought against the organisational claims made, not necessarily in a court, but someone says, look, I was abused in the organisation one way or another. I want compensation for this, so I want it to be dealt with. You don't have a policy that deals with that, do you?
We're certainly in the process of developing that, particularly since the release of the paper on redress from the Royal Commission. We've studied that, and we're basically in agreement with many of the proposals in there. We don't take the view that we're waiting just until we hear the final thing, but there still are a number of questions that it seems to have to be resolved.
And that's this 2015 Royal Commission report on redress and civil litigation that you're referring to, is that
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so that's been around for a couple of years now, but in short, you're saying you're working on a policy which we can expect at some stage.
So they've had the Royal Commission's report on redress since January of 2015, which, by the way, you can download this from their website if you want to have a look at it. And they claim that they are not waiting to implement the policy, but they've done nothing for all this time. They've implemented nothing and they've done nothing. And then they start asking about their big concern, which is actually always the main concern of this organization. And that is, how much money then will we have to pay to support the victims that we created and hide pedophiles in the process?
If the number of case files is the basis for determining maybe our share in a redress scheme, we would feel that would be not in the interest of being fair and adequate, because
You needn't worry about it. Your organisation came clearly within our terms of reference because we are required to look at the response of your organisation.
Yeah, which we don't contest.
And that response, of course, when inadequate, will cause damage to people. You understand that?
We understand, yes, that's a response.
And from the evidence that we've had, that is likely to have happened. You may not be an organisational abuser as such, but the response of your organisation may have compounded, indeed very much compounded, the damage to that individual. As far as the redress scheme is concerned, if it takes the form, or roughly the form the Commission has recommended, your liability will be determined on a case-by-case basis,
right,
and you'll be contributing on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, so that's... If
The files that we send off to the police, well, may or may not represent a part of your liability. I don't know.
You know, they claim to abhor child abuse, yet what they really abhor is compensating their victims of child abuse. The commissioner at the hearing had a question for the two elders, and note his dismay at their lack of empathy towards their victims.
I want to know, in terms of your response to the 1,006 files of victims and subsequent victims that have come to your attention, whether the Jehovah's Witnesses branch in Australia have assisted or decided to assist or planned to assist victims or survivors with respect to therapeutic intervention by independent experts.
Yes, so on that, Commissioner, we, of course, allow the individual to decide who they would like to use, but certainly we will assist in funding any of the victims who fall into that category automatically under the terms of reference of the redress scheme. We would see part of the redress would be covering medical and ongoing psychological or psychiatric help or some other form of...
And you do that presently?
No, because we haven't had any actual claims or correspondence until this last mainly 6 to 8 months.
Well, this is not really about the law. It's about going further than compassion and actually providing people help for grievous psychological harm. Surely you're not going to wait until 2018 when the redress scheme finally comes up to reach out to victims and survivors?
No, not at all, Commissioner, because we have already now been in contact with these, so the ones who've made claims, we're not actively going out looking for other victims because we don't know what the situation is with them, but those who've corresponded to us, who've sought some form of redress or compensation, we're at the point now where we can address that long before 2018.
Well, perhaps I could ask through you, Mr. Stewart. Perhaps I could ask through you if you could give us some formal advice as to whether you are assisting anyone at present with financial help for independent therapeutic advice as a branch.
We'll follow that up, Commissioner.
You can just see how the Commissioner was disgusted by their lack of empathy. He said, you know, it's not about the law. It's about going further than compassion and providing help for these victims of abuse that you have been responsible for. You have compounded. Maybe they didn't do the actual sexual abuse, but they compounded it with their policies. You know, many of these ones have gone on to commit suicide. The organization just washes their hands of them. Oh, we're not even going to have a memorial service for them. Just couldn't care less. They really couldn't. I don't understand, but this is the way they are. They're not looking for victims of abuse, they said, or looking to help them. They're waiting for you to come to them. And then only because they're mandated by this commission and by law that they are forced to help them at all. It's like having a boyfriend that you force, hey, give me some flowers, give me some candy, you know? You can't feel too good about it. You know that it didn't come from their heart. It came because they're forced to do it. And that doesn't make them anything like Jesus at all. This organization is nothing like the way Jesus was, lacking completely in compassion. He added, surely you're not going to wait until 2018. And they're like, oh no, of course not. No, surely they will. But don't call me Shirley. No, the sad thing is they will wait. They will fight this until their last dying breath. And why do I say this? Because this is their nature. This is the way they've always been. I've seen them in action. I've seen them in a court of law. I see the way they try to push around their victims. Instead of helping them and being compassionate, they try to force them into, you know, gag orders and so forth. But as always, it's about money, not about compassion. Okay, if you made it this far, then you've made it down to the last point, which was all about the society's view of women and women's involvement in the decision-making processes. Let's have a look.
That's the point, isn't it? Your answer in relation to decision-making is that you are scripturally bound, that the decisions can only be made by men.
Yes, once again, that's a scriptural requirement that we adhere to.
In, if I can, the March 2017 Child Safeguarding Policy,
Tab 11.
Paragraph number 10.
Yeah.
Says, again, a victim's never required to confront his or her alleged abuser. The allegation can be made in the form of a written statement. And then 2 sentences on, adults who were victims of child abuse may be accompanied by a confidant of either gender to provide them with moral support when meeting with the elders. So, again, it's a valid point.
So basically it was a lot of talk just to say that nothing had changed. The only change they made, I suppose you could say, is that either gender was able to to go in and in judicial committees or whatever to accompany a victim of abuse. They tried to make it sound like women are involved in every stage of the process except the decision-making one. But that was the whole question, is can we involve women in the decision-making roles? You know, the Royal Commission wasn't asking if women could be elders or if women could be governing body members. They were simply asking, could women be involved in the decision-making process? If there's a victim of abuse, could that child speak to women and have those women relay it to elders? You know? And as has been discussed in the previous commission, women have large roles in the Bible. We have women who were judges. You know, there's women who were like Esther had a large hand in what happened to the Israelites. They refuse that. They've got their old boys club. They're happy. They're going to find a scripture that proves them to be right. You can bet your boots on that. And case closed. They're unwilling to budge at all. So that's basically what happened. And those were the points that were discussed. As I mentioned, I did up a table to try to help you make sense of some of these things in a very quick format. Let's have a look at it. So I had done up a long narration walking you through that table, but I don't know. I think you can have a look at it for yourself without me taking up too much more of your time. And basically, of the 8 topics that I listed there as having been discussed through this hearing, 3 of them were left completely without any change whatsoever. And that's namely the 2-witness rule, the fact that they shun those who disassociate, and the organization's role of women in decision-making roles. You know, the organization just appears more than ever to be led not by Jehovah and his Holy Spirit, but by their legal department. It's strange that they have this idea that they don't report abuse to the authorities. I just don't get that. Why not report them all? You know, why do they have to wait to be told by Satan's system what they need to do? And why don't they feel they have an obligation to the community, to children outside their organization? To me, it's just diabolical to unleash somebody who you know is a pedophile, who you know will reoffend, and just walk away like, oh, well, it's not our job to protect the community. Wow. I thought these were loving people. They certainly claim to be. They abhor child abuse. And yet they drag their feet throughout the whole process. You know, where's your redress scheme? Nowhere to be seen. You've only had it for 2.5 years. You know, what have you done about it? You know, what about your child safeguarding policy? The same thing. What have you done about it? Have you told the members? No. Why not? Oh, we're waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for more children to be abused? They need to know what their rights are. I don't understand. Let's have a look at a current article in a major Australian newspaper because it has some very interesting things to say. This is an article that talks mainly about the 2-witness rule. And they describe it as being basically a get-out-of-jail-free card for those organizations that strictly adhere to the 2-witness rule. It mentions there that Terence O'Brien, the elder there that was on the right, says that they considered scrapping it, but they decided it's our stand. This one doctor who deals with child sexual abuse, she called it ludicrous. She said that the idea that you need a witness is a ludicrous one because these things are done in private. They're never done in front of any witnesses. And she says that's one of the primary reasons why this has been able to flourish. What was really interesting about this article is that it went on to talk about how the other churches were making positive steps. So this is what the Jehovah's Witness organization is doing. They're remaining, marrying themselves to these ancient policies and trying desperately to not open their minds to any other scripture that might say otherwise. But the other churches, on the other hand, are making positive steps, and they've actually apologized. This one president of the church there said that we are, and I am deeply sorry that we didn't protect and care for children in accordance with our Christian values. I'm truly sorry. Isn't that something? Have we heard J.W. Org apologize? Nope. And the Washington Post there reported that victims in the organization for their witnesses were often forced to confront their abusers in person, and that all complaints, which averaged 12 each year for 65 years, were meticulously recorded and sealed. So these other religious organizations are apologizing, but not JW Org. No, they'd rather fight against their victims and continue to maintain policies that put children at risk and that hide pedophiles, like their two-witness rule. They want to keep their victims quiet through gag orders or through shunning. Such an unloving organization. We were always taught that, when I was a witness, that the other religious organizations were so bad. But I don't really see it that way anymore. I mean, the other religious organizations are not perfect, and I'm not a huge fan of them either. But you know what? They do have programs for the elderly, for children, for the homeless, for those who are hungry, like soup kitchens. They really do try to help out in the community. What does JW Org do? But have a, we're better than them attitude. Why? You're not even apologizing for the wrongs that you have committed. There's no reason in the world why they should put themselves up on a pedestal. So the next little while will be very interesting because the organization is going to have to come out with their child safeguarding policy, which I am very glad for, because I do want to see the children within the organization and outside protected against pedophiles. And they're going to have this redress scheme where actual victims will start to be compensated in the near future. So I'm very happy about that. So the next little while, as I said, will be very interesting. There's so many more things I could have discussed in this video. I decided to, keep cutting and cutting and cutting so that it didn't get to be out of hand. But please, in the comments below, feel free to put down your take on the Royal Commission and have a chance to watch it for yourself, because as I said, I've posted the entire thing in a different video. And if you want to read through the transcripts and all the other amount of evidence that was presented, you can read all of it on the Royal Commission's website, which I will post, as I said before, in the links. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I look forward to seeing you again. And if you liked it, then like it and share it and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.